So I'd love to introduce you to our next speaker. Hannah Olson is the founder and CEO of Chronically Capable, a digital talent marketplace that connects job seekers with chronic illness and disabilities to flexible job opportunities. Hannah's own experience navigating her career while undergoing intensive treatment for Lyme disease sparked the idea for her company, which launched last spring in Washington, D.C. Hannah is known globally for her invisible disability advocacy and was recently named one of the top 100 powerful women of 2020 by Entrepreneur magazine. So welcome, Hannah. Hannah will be in conversation with our own amazing Mariella Marie, who is one of our virtual moderators. Mariella is a Renaissance woman and social impact multimedia producer who has spent a decade working with diverse technologists, independent artists, and divergent innovators across the globe to deepen their audience's emotional intelligence. Sharing the virtual stage with disruptive leaders such as Deepak Chopra, Rock Goddess, and Catherine Zaleski, among many more, Mariella curates meaningful conversations and installations centered around belonging, amplifies underserved and underheard voices, and develops provocative initiatives that bridge our shared stories and connect us to an enlightened state of awareness. So Mariella, take it away.
Thank you so much, Meg, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you, Power to Fly, for hosting this amazing conversation. Hannah, our guest speaker here, is about to drop a lot of knowledge. And Hannah, I just want to say thank you, first of all, for taking time out of your schedule to chat with us today. Let's begin the session by learning more about you and what led you to start Chronically Capable.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here today, chatting with you all. My name's Hannah Olson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Chronically Capable. I started this business, now I guess 2.5 years ago, after my own experience having navigated the workplace while living with an invisible disability. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease in college, had a really, really bad case, and unfortunately was given a PICC line following my graduation. And for those of you who aren't familiar, a PICC line is essentially a permanent IV. I was hooked up to IV antibiotics for nearly 8 hours a day. And I had a boss who was not okay with this. And so I saw firsthand the real pain point here as a job seeker of being forced to choose between my health and my career. And I thought, this is something that I can't be the only one experiencing. And I'm sure we'll get into the depth of chronic illness and disability in the United States and globally, really. But it was something that I soon learned I wasn't alone, and that there were hundreds of millions of people out there struggling with this same sentiment of wanting to work, and mentally their ambitions being intact and being able to work, but struggling to find and connect with employers who care, and who were committed to actually including these people. So that's kind of what really led me to start Chronically Capable, along with my co-founder, who's actually my former boss. And he had really believed in this idea and helped build out all the technology behind Chronically Capable.
Wow. Well, it's fascinating to hear, all of the accolades that you've, acquired since starting out and, starting this business for yourself. So congratulations there. Looking forward to supporting the great work that you're doing. I know it's probably hard to pick one problem that you're tackling. So feel free to, bring to our awareness a couple of problems that Chronically Capable is trying to solve.
Yeah, so I'm going to distill it down to really one big pain point for the sake of time. And, what we see the problem as being pretty straightforward. It's that there's this disconnect between employers who want job seekers and employees to disclose their illness and to ask for support, and job seekers, on the other hand, who want to disclose and ask for accommodations, but are fearing this due to stigma, fear, lack of education and representation. And so for employers, this really results in a loss of employee productivity, lower retention rates, lower revenue, net income, and not to mention that companies are missing out on potential for federal tax credits. And so really that's why we're on a mission to build a better workplace for disabled professionals and the businesses that they support.
Awesome. And can you just let us know a little bit more about the platform and how you work with employees and employers? I know you're slowly but surely giving us the info, but dive in deep. Feel free to let us know now. And for those who are listening live, how can they support the work that you're doing and get involved as well?
Absolutely. So obviously it's a talent marketplace. So there's two sides of our work. I'll start with employers, because it's less fun on the employment side, but all employers who are part of our network really are dedicated to hiring and supporting not only hiring and supporting, but actually elevating those living with chronic illnesses and disabilities. And so as an employer on the platform, we work closely with talent acquisition and diversity and inclusion teams to really build out custom solutions. And these range from recruiting to 501c3 reporting, education, branding. What we really do is we build these deep relationships with employers and work with them to actually amplify their commitment to disability inclusion. Half of my job is education and really making sure that all folks within an organization understand this problem, which I'm sure we'll get to. On the job seeker side, when a job seeker signs up and completes their profile, we actually use machine learning to send customized recommendations based on the candidate's job preferences and accommodation needs. So job seekers are able to access roles that are fit for their needs. So taking it a step further than just finding a job with your skills or your location, we're actually matching you with jobs based on your accommodation preferences. Job seekers are also able to access our community platform. It's called Club Capable, which is the largest professional community for chronically ill and disabled professionals. And this is a place where you can network, access resources, mentorship programs, and more, and really, an inclusive place, really bringing in kind of that LinkedIn networking aspect of the business.
Well, I love that you have the mentorship aspect involved as well. I would love to also hear your experience there. Why did you decide to have that initiative involved? Can you share, the importance of mentorship? Because I feel like this is a common thread that I hear come up when we're speaking about being intentional and inclusive and leaving the door open and sending the elevator back down and all of these things. Mentorship, why is it important specifically for the community that you want to reach out to?
Yeah, it's incredibly important, and it's something we didn't learn right away, but we saw that there was this lack of representation among leadership. It's something I'm sure I'll get into a bit deeper, but starting from the top of an organization, if folks aren't disclosing and standing up and saying, I'm a leader who also identifies as having an illness or disability, people within the organization and future employees may feel shame or stigma to disclose and to ask for that support. And so by creating these mentorship programs, we're allowing senior leaders to actually interact with these new entries or folks who may be new to disclosing, and creating a safe space within the organization. Mentorship, we launched our first cohort this spring, which was amazing. And we had folks from about 26 different organizations. And from there, we were able to match people with industry leaders to give advice, get access to the support that they need, and then really, empower job seekers to feel comfortable entering the job seeking process. We're now hoping to build these out with our partner organizations with internal mentorship programs, but mentorship really offers that one-on-one safe space. And it's something that we found to be incredibly important to building our platform. This isn't just a space where companies can post a job. You actually have to be committed to really walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
I love that you ended on that note, because as I love to remind people, there's a lot of lip service happening these days. So I just love to hear when organizations and companies are really taking initiative to practice what they preach. So I appreciate that, Hannah. Okay, so speaking of education, and that knowledge is truly power. I would love for you to educate us a little bit. So in a Forbes article, you mentioned how you were going through Facebook support group posts and taking screenshots of people saying the same statement, which was, I have a chronic illness and I'm having trouble finding work. Can you educate us on the disability unemployment rate in the United States and any kind of global aspect you can share with us as well?
Yeah, so I'm going to say some numbers that might shock you all, but this is CDC.gov statistics. So 6 out of 10 American adults live with a chronic illness. That's 60% of our population. And to add to that, 1 out of 4 live with a disability. When we think about this is most people in the United States. And I think it's hard for people to put that into perspective, because 70% of these disabilities are invisible, which means that you may not see that someone is struggling with an illness or disability. So it's important to really first off know the facts here. And the unemployment rate is very, very different amongst those with disabilities and those without. In 2022, this is US Bureau of Labor Statistics. In 2020, about 18% of people with a disability were employed, which is obviously a stark contrast from the 62% of non-disabled people who were employed in 2020. So we're talking about, way more than double that of non-disabled Americans. And so this is a huge problem that needs to be resolved. I think, as you said, I'm glad you liked my walking the walk, talking the talk comment, because it's something that there's been a lot of lip service. We've seen companies come out and put these statements out, but in reality, they're not actually hiring these people, as we see with these unemployment rates. And so it's one thing to say you're an inclusive organization. It's another to actually hire and retain these employees. And so these numbers are drastically different.
So I know that you mentioned, that the numbers might be shocking. For me, it's not shocking. I feel like there's so much taboo around expressing, the truth of, can I share this with my employer? Can I share this with my neighbor? How can I, make sure that I'm not being, set back because of, who I am, essentially, and make sure that inclusion is really being practiced. What is the government doing to reduce this gap?
Yeah, so as we most of us know that the ADA exists. This month, we're in the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And within this, Section 503, it is a portion of the ADA that actually requires companies to recruit, hire, promote, and retain individuals with disabilities in their workforce at a level of 7%. So organizations that have at least 100 employees need to strive to reach that 7% within each job group. It also requires contractors to provide employees and applicants the opportunity to both self-identify as an illness with a disability, or individual with a disability. But only 13% of companies in the United States have actually reached this target percent of 7%. So this is a huge problem. And the reason is because right now the penalty for not hitting the 7% goal is really a slap on the wrist. And by that, we're not actually forcing companies to realize that this is something you need to do. However, an exciting news back, I think, now 2 weeks ago, I'm looking at my calendar. The Biden administration came out with an executive order that is requiring the federal government to actually hire and include those living with disabilities. And so if we can start at the federal level, my hopes are that we're going to really start to see this pushed from private companies as well, trying to hit this 7% representation. And I'm just hoping that soon that 7% won't be a goal, but really a mandate.
And what can we do, as folks who work on teams or who are looking to, move into a new industry? How can we make sure that we're holding folks accountable to, move with the times, be with the changes, and that means, be inclusive and putting, certain practices into policy, changing or reshaping value systems? How can we hold each other accountable?
Starts from the top. So I think, I'll bring up 4 points of creating inclusive workplaces, which I think is incredibly important. There's more than 4 points, but start off is really fostering an inclusive business culture. So if we don't see leadership standing up as role models and mentors, people are never going to feel comfortable to disclose. And so it needs to start at the top. We see women. I love being a female entrepreneur and being inspired by women saying I'm a CEO, but I have never in my lifetime seen someone come out and say I'm a senior executive, senior management, and I have a disability. So that's something that needs to start at the top. Number 2, I'd say, is really ensuring that we have disability inclusive outreach and recruitment efforts in place. And so this really involves building a pipeline of candidates. So an example could be working with Chronically Capable and really reaching this pool, this talent pool. Third, I'd say, is really making sure that all external and internal communication of company policies and practices are clear, and they're really showing the commitment to disability inclusive work culture. And this includes providing training, providing resources and support, but making sure that we have these systems in place. And really last piece is to really ensure a barrier-free workplace. And the way that we can do this is inevitably with accessible information and technology, which we've seen happen in just the last year. The world went remote and suddenly we had to create accessible workplaces. And my hopes are that long past the pandemic, we continue to keep these practices in place and continue to have tech accessibility. We've got captioners here today. That's amazing. This needs to exist long past the pandemic. So those are kind of the main 4 tips I have for holding each other accountable.
Thank you for that, Hannah. Okay, so we have a live comment here from Gali, who asks, how do we make self-disclosure a safe and comfortable disclosure for our candidates and employees?
a great question, and something we are really working on at Chronically Capable is to help with disclosure in the workplace. Right now, I don't know if I've said this statistic, but we talked about the depth of how many people live with an illness and disability. But only 3.2% of people disclose this to their employers. That is a huge gap from the 60% that I talked about with an illness. And so there's obviously this huge gap, and people are feeling fear, shame, and stigma in order to disclose. And so with this, we really need to make sure that the process is outlined. Each organization shows how to actually go about this, that HR is educated, and that people feel safe by having leadership actually disclose. And that's why I said from the top down, we have to create cultures where people feel open that this is an organization that's going to accept me. I believe later on I'll get into a bit more of kind of tactical tips about disclosing and talking to your coworkers. But for now, I'd say that it needs to start at the top down and needs to be transparent about the process.
And feel free to dive in now. I mean, you're on a great flow, and I know that folks are submitting some live questions now that I think have everything to do with what you are holding back. So go ahead and let us know what you have to say about that now.
Yeah, so I think in terms of having that conversation, either with your employer or with coworkers, we get this question all the time: is, how do I actually have this conversation, and what do I do in order to share my needs? We're working on some tools to help support this, but in the meantime, I've got 3 main tips that I share with all folks in our community. Number 1, keep it simple. You do not have to mention the ADA or use the phrase reasonable accommodation. It can be really as easy as saying to your employer, I need to talk to you about this difficulty that I may have in order to get work done, being that I need to have time for my medication. So really, you don't have to mention too much about the ADA. This is something all employers should be educated on. Number 2 is really to put this in writing. Although there aren't really any formal requirements for submitting requests in writing per the ADA, some employers may have their own paperwork. So you can ask your employer, your HR about the paperwork, and really start there and either submit a letter from your medical provider, or you can write a letter and attach your medical documentation. Lastly is really to talk to HR directly. I know it can be very uncomfortable to speak with your direct supervisors. So we really try to advise actually disclosing to HR because their department is in place to actually support you. But just on, last kind of personal note, I think really, you don't have to overshare. I found myself back a few years ago just saying, I'm Hannah, I have Lyme disease and, XYZ, and shooting off my diagnoses. And that wasn't actually important. It was, here's what I need to best perform at work. And so I started to shift that into, I'm Hannah, I have a chronic health condition, and because of that, I have an IV. And so therefore, I need to be able to access my medication at my desk. And I kept it simple, short and sweet. They don't need to know. And again, I want to be clear that it is completely your decision whether or not to disclose. It is an entirely personal decision, and you should not feel forced to. But the benefits often do outweigh not disclosing.
All right, we've got some live questions coming up. I'm excited that folks are engaging with this conversation, so thank you. Allison writes, does ADHD qualify as something that needs to be disclosed? I'm not sure if it is an illness, but it is qualified as a disorder.
Yeah. So again, entirely up to you whether or not you choose to disclose. I want that to be a clear statement I make throughout this presentation. But ADHD is, you are protected under the ADA. And so therefore we do see tons of folks in our community, ADHD, anxiety, depression. These are things that, again, you do not have to disclose, but if you are looking for the support, example is extra time, or, I may need to have a flexible work schedule, that I would recommend, if you're comfortable doing so, disclosing that to HR. And the reason is disclosing isn't just beneficial for the company, but it allows them to really reallocate resources and support that in turn helps you. So for example, if you have ADHD and you may need extra time, if you don't say anything to your employer, they might not be able to provide that for you. And so the reallocation of resources and that support happens from the disclosure level.
Great. And we have another question here from Liza. Liza asks, what types of accommodations, examples of accommodations, can be provided and available without disclosure being an issue?
Yeah, so in terms of accommodations, it really ranges depending on the organization. Something that we do on our platform is we keep all accommodation offerings listed up front. So if you were to go to our website right now and clicked on an employer profile, not only do you learn about the organization, but you also see all of their accommodation offerings, which are listed up front. And this, we try to keep it very transparent because, as a job seeker, there's usually little transparency into this process. And so we want to keep it as transparent as possible. But in terms of disclosing, I don't think that any accommodation request should be an issue because you are protected under the ADA. It just depends really on the organization and their policies related to disclosure. I don't know if that answered well, but.
Yes, so for our live callers, please continue to write your questions or reflections in the chat box, and I'll flag that to our guest speaker. We've got just about 10 more minutes left. So actually, I would love to just take a bunch of steps back. Let's start by defining what is a chronic illness for the employer to know, and also for someone who might be at that pivotal moment where they are just now realizing, or maybe they are looking for the courage to speak about this publicly.
Absolutely. So in terms of chronic illness, chronic diseases, they're defined broadly, but according to the CDC, they're defined as conditions that last 1 year or more and require ongoing medical attention, or if they limit activities of daily living. So chronic diseases can be things such as heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and these are actually the leading causes of death and disability in the United States. I mentioned this before, but 157 million plus Americans currently live with a chronic condition. That equates to about 60% of our population. And what's pretty alarming is that racial and ethnic minorities are 1.5 to 2 times more likely than white people to have most of the major chronic diseases, which means that if we're talking about solving diversity and inclusion, we cannot forget to include chronic diseases when we're considering this. So chronic diseases like me could be Lyme disease. It really ranges, IBS, rheumatoid arthritis. The list really ranges. And it's actually quite alarming how many diseases qualify as chronic. But for example, anxiety, you may not think of that as a chronic illness, but if you're being treated for a year or more, if it may limit your daily activities, then that is in fact a chronic disease.
And I'd love for you to just speak a little bit to what you've seen in the workplace and on a personal level as well in the past, year and some change since we've been going through this global pandemic. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you see? That, I mean, of course, right now data is being collected right now, so we don't have that to offer, unless you do. I don't know if you can pull something out of your bag right now and show us. But what is just something that has called your attention in the past, since March of last year?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, we launched in February of last year to the public. So obviously a crazy time to launch any business, but then something in the recruiting industry, woof, that was pretty wild. But in March, what happened, it was almost like this magic wand of you can work remote and you can work remote. And suddenly across the board, companies went fully remote. And for the first time ever, the topics of remote work, diversity and inclusion, and health all came to a head all at the same time. And so we started to talk about health in the context of work, which was something that prior to the pandemic, we shied away from because, as we said, there's so much fear and stigma and shame attached to that. But suddenly we were forced to talk about it. And I hate that a pandemic happened, and I wish it never did. But what it did do is it did ignite the conversation around flexibility at work, accessibility, and it really showed employers that we need to care about the flexibility and health and well-being for our employees. And so if I've learned anything from the pandemic is that I think that this started it ignited that match that we needed. And I'm really hoping that these practices that we just learned and these accessibility tactics really do continue past the pandemic, because accessibility is something that will always matter, pandemic aside. And so that's really been my biggest learnings. And I've written a lot about this, so feel free to check out our website. Written a lot about the pandemic. It's obviously impacted our community proportionately higher than those without illnesses. So feel free to check out our site, which the link should be in the chat as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, so speaking of accountability, and companies taking the initiative to create, the accommodation and the necessary safe space for this community. how can they get past the issue of it being too expensive to accommodate someone with a chronic illness, that the ROI of the employee is not matched by their performance, et cetera? How can you debunk these misconceptions?
I'll start by saying they're definitely misconceptions. So first off, beyond just thinking about the cultural and economic benefits, some companies aren't taking advantage of the benefits of disability initiatives. They're concerned about the costs of accommodating, when in reality, these are often minimal and fruitful investments. So there was a study done by the Job Accommodation Network, which is part of the US Department of Labor. And actually in this study, 59% of accommodations cost absolutely nothing to make. And the rest typically cost only about $500 per employee with a disability. So these are very minimal costs. And really what I like to say is that when we actually make the workplace accessible for those with disabilities, we're making it accessible for everyone, for those who have not disclosed, those who may get a disability down the line. But by building these accessible workplaces and policies, we're helping all employees to work better. Also, on top of that, as I mentioned, there's both federal and cultural and economic incentives. On the federal side, there are tax credits for including this population, which do outweigh those costs of actually providing accommodations. These can be up to $9,600 per employee hired per year in tax credits. And then we see across the board, we see higher retention rates, higher net income, higher employee productivity, as well as just an overall increase in employee happiness. So that was a very long-winded way of saying it's a complete misconception, and it's something that's very easily debunked with statistics.
And as with anything, when we're trying to, really practice what we preach as far as being more inclusive in the workspace, that takes carving time out to practice that. So, the intentionality behind it, and not just letting the day take you because you got to get to that profit, you got to get to that number or that data figure. It's like, okay, let me take care of my people first, which means taking the time to connect, practicing a little bit of emotional intelligence, changing some policies and values if necessary, but honoring that time and not just thinking that, okay, we want it, and hopefully it'll happen because we wrote down a sentence or two on our website, right?
Right.
So we've got about 3 minutes left. We have a comment here. Someone is asking, is your organization planning to expand outside the US?
Great question. So we are currently our job seeker community. We represent 152 countries. As I mentioned, we launched just last year. So since then, we've had over 50,000 people sign up completely organically. We have not done a single ad whatsoever. This was just a necessary platform. And so we're really excited about this community. Currently, our employers are all based within the US. However, many have jobs outside of the United States. So be sure to check us out. We've got jobs in Europe, Canada, and hoping, of course, to expand outside of the United States. If you're an employer outside of the US, we've got a lot of folks externally that are looking for jobs. So encourage you to come check us out.
And I know that we're dropping the link in the public chat, but can you just let us know how we can connect with you online, your socials, or whatever website you prefer for us to connect with you?
Absolutely. So our website is www.capable, CAPABLE.work, WORK. Come join us. We've got an amazing community. As I mentioned, we also have a community platform, which is a bit of Slack and Facebook mixed together, where you can connect and network with folks. So if you're not even in the market for a job, but you're looking for that sense of professional community, I encourage you to come join us. We built this with as to be a safe space. And I wish that this platform existed when I was looking for a job. And so my only hope is that we can continue to grow this community, and the more of you that join on, the better. So hope to see you there.
Awesome. And we've got about 1 more minute. I want you to take us out with some food for thought. What can we keep in mind to stay mindful as we move forward after this conversation, Hannah?
Yeah, so I'd say that inclusion and accessibility, it's an ongoing process, and we always have to continue to learn. I did something in this this video chat today that I actually am embarrassed about. I didn't describe myself at the beginning of this. I always like to start off and say, you know, I'm Hannah. I would be described as a white woman, and I have brown hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt. That's something I always do to start a presentation. I apologize I didn't do that. But I think, you know, it's things like that that we're always learning, and we always have to continue to learn. I made a mistake. I'm learning from it, and I'm remembering that next time I won't do that. So I think to always not get down on ourselves about this, but understand that as the times change, we're also learning and adapting with time. So continue to put in the work, keep learning. There are so many great resources out there, and it's up to each of us to put in the work and learn. So again, I really appreciate being here today, and hope to have you all join us at Chronically Capable. And thanks to the Power to Fly team as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, I'll pass the mic back to you, Meg. Thank you, Power to Fly, and we'll see you on the next conversation.
Thank you both so much. That was absolutely wonderful. Hannah, I can't wait to check out Chronically Capable. So thank you for spreading the word about that.